Hello, welcome back to my channel, King Bullet here, and today I will be covering the second part of the fan-made ending, Attack on Titan No Requiem. I would definitely recommend watching the first part of my analysis of this fan-made ending, but if not, I can briefly go over what it's about. It's essentially a project that is 100% non-profit, written by Team Attack on Titan No Requiem. It begins with a rewrite of chapter 137 and onwards. There was a lot of stigma behind the first chapter, and I assume the second chapter as well. A lot of people say that the authors of this work have their own personal agenda. I don't think they do, other than wanting to rewrite the ending since, let's be honest, the ending wasn't written to the best of Armin's ability. But even if they did have an agenda other than this, what I would do here is apply a principle known as death of an author, where I can't really use outside opinions or their outside opinions to criticize this work in particular. So let's get into the chapter. It begins with a continuation of Armin and Eren meeting each other. Eren mentions that Armin was right about the frozen plains of snowfields and sand. Kid Eren asking Armin if he's here to help, since all he's ever wanted is them to see that scenery. The scenery of their freedom beyond the walls. Without the walls, they can live wherever they want and see whatever they want. The only people standing in his way from achieving this dream are his enemies, and that's who Eren seeks to destroy, annihilate. And Armin cannot accept any of this. He can't just let innocent people be sacrificed. Armin making the comparison between these children, these families, to their own family. Eren poses the question, what difference does it make to you between our homes and their homes? Armin is frustrated by this question. He tells him there isn't one. If you strip away titles, history, they are all the same. Eren notes that the world does not see it that way. Armin refuting this by saying that doesn't matter, that doesn't mean they should give up. Eren is not willing to concede. He tells them that this history cannot be defeated by just words alone, and that the future of Aotnr will not be built of speeches and dialogue, but rather blood, and he will end this war. Now, a lot of people might not like this Eren, but Eren does state in a prior canon chapter that he's been like this since birth, somebody full of hatred, violence, with the inherent nature to seek freedom. Now, all of this doesn't have to be true, but Eren believes this is a part of his identity, and he's starting to become very insecure when he's challenged. He thinks he has to create this very strong identity to carry on moving forward. It gives off this very sinister sense, but at the same time, there's a vulnerability to Eren. So back to the fan chapter, they continue to debate. Eren saying if we don't fight, we will die. That is our reality. As long as Eldians are perceived as devils, nothing can change. Eren continues to batter Armin, telling him nothing you say will ever change anything. Armin having an epiphany, realizing that all the people who died up until this point would have died for nothing. They get into a scuffle, and Armin begins to see some of Eren's memories. He sees a memory about Historia, presumably from Eren's perspective. She says that she knew she was giving up her freedom when she accepted this role. Her life was never really hers to begin with, purely based off her blood and lineage. We also see Hanj, or Hanji maybe? I'm just gonna call it Hanj since that's what I've been calling her even in my other videos. During his flashback at the table, kind of explaining the shard we see of Hanj that was never explained. It's very interesting that Hanj was used in this situation here, since it always seems to be Hanj who notices this interaction between Eren and Historia throughout the entire story even prior. Anyway, during this interaction, Historia establishes that they've always carved their own path. They've never needed help before, and they're not going to start now. And essentially what's being established here is what was established during the uprising. That Eren, just like Historia in this scenario, had no control over his fate, and his life wasn't really his own. Just as her blood forced her into her role, Eren's blood forced him into the role of savior of humanity. It's only through the words of Historia he realized that he could shatter this fate and unburden himself of his shackles quite literally. And I think this conversation is kind of alluding to that. Now, I won't go into too much detail because I could literally do an entire video on this relationship of Eren and his confliction with sins and inheritance. Back to the fan chapter, the conversation crosses over to another conversation with Eren and Historia slightly older during the time skip, where Historia notes that she needs to accept the plan of her kind of like creating children so they can inherit the founding titan and become these weapons to defend the island. However, she makes it clear that this won't be her own choice, showing that she's falling back into this state of being bound by fate, kind of regressing as a character. When Eren declines this and tells her that she's the worst girl in the world, repeating those lines that helped him break his own fate. This kind of then swaps into the conversation with Floch, where he explains to Floch that he needs to destroy all of these enemies, which happen to be the rest of the world, telling him how much there is at stake, and that he didn't tell the others since they won't be able to do what's necessary, telling him that it's us or them. Either way, he's about to commit mass slaughter. Once it starts, there's no turning back. He has to commit this unforgivable sin, and he's got less than 5 years to do it. He needs to become the devil of Aotnr in order to save Aotnr. It doesn't matter if he dies. He will not let them steal what belongs to them. Coming back into the conversation with him and Historia. Historia calling Eren a coward for being able to think that he can run away from his sins, their own sins, via escaping through death. Since very selfishly, she doesn't want to walk through hell on her own and be left again just like she was by Frida and Ymir. This selfishness is ironically a part of her character. This idea that she was never really given options, so she wants to selfishly reclaim choice, free will, and freedom, which is very integral to her character, since throughout season 1 and a little bit of season 2, she carries around a facade that she's selfless and lets others control her. That's a contrast between Krista and Historia. At the end of the original ending, Historia never really challenged this identity problem. The irony being, when the manga concluded, many of the people working on Attack on Titan referred to Historia as Krista within interviews, and this was never really challenged by Isayama, which is massively upsetting, since that's a completely different character to Historia, technically speaking. But the sad irony here is that it's true, that she kinda did remain Krista even towards the end of the story, even as it concluded. So back to her fan chapter, Historia said the truth is that she's scared, and then it goes back into chapter 130 in the original, where she said, what would you think about me having a child? They're technically adding more dialogue to it since it was cut. She says, I know I'm asking for a lot, but I don't know what else to do. Eren saying, I'll find a way, I promise. Apologizing. Eren saying all he knows is if he doesn't do this, it will never end, referring to or referencing, I assume, that endless cycle he mentioned in chapter 130. And then finally, as foreshadowed, Historia is saying that she is really the worst, most despicable girl in the world, and that she won't tell anybody what Eren's planning, bringing the whole enemies of humanity theme kind of full circle from when it was first established, since she is now literally an enemy of humanity, just like Eren, who plans to destroy the world. Feels very sinister. But what I do want to address is this idea that this Eren comes across very cringe, since I can see it from a perspective of many of our original ending lovers, who may see it as this is like Historia replacing Mikasa maybe. But it's really weird because I've never really understood this. People see this as if it's like a shipping conflict, when firstly this is like a fan ending, so it's gonna be different obviously. But even changing something as small as who Eren ended up with is massively integral to the themes of a story, which is what a lot of people miss, ironically. The Attack on Titan No Requiem team even go out of their way to have like theories and analysis section, where they even explain their decisions and bring up this lamp and the apple theory, which if you read through is quite interesting, since it links their choice to the lore of a story, the past and history of a story. Now if you happen to be one of those people who didn't like this fan ending based off the idea that they kind of like substituted Eren's love interest with, then I want you to genuinely ask yourself if it makes more sense linking Mikasa with Ymir Fritz than it does Historia with Ymir Fritz, since I can guarantee you that you didn't think Mikasa and Ymir Fritz had a lot in common other than the fact that both serve another person as if they are their master. However, the issue here is a lot of characters also share this theme, this slave master theme. For example, Kenny Ackerman, Erwin, Levi. I can literally go on forever. It was a massive narrative point that everybody's a slave to something. This theme was never mutually exclusive to only Mikasa, meaning any of these other characters I mentioned could have just as easily been linked to Ymir Fritz. Now I'm not trying to antagonize Mikasa, it's just that if they were gonna approach this theme of her linking into like Ymir and Ymir choosing her, then there should have been a lot more setup for it. Whereas somebody like Historia shares the theme of her being a slave to her facade and her bloodline, but more interestingly, she's a direct descendant of Ymir Fritz. They share a somewhat identical past and backstory, a similar appearance, and it's directly been stated her fake name Krista came from a book about Ymir Fritz, in which the book referred to Ymir as Krista, Historia also stating that she wanted to be like Krista. Back to the fan chapter, Armin lets go of Eren, so he's just seen everything, asking Eren why he didn't tell him about what just happened. Eren tells him he wasn't meant to see that, Armin replying that it does not absolve you. The fact that he hid this proves how much of a hypocrite Eren is, since if he had told them at the beginning, then they might have been able to come up with another plan or option. But now, because of Eren, a lot of the people they care about have to die. All he's done is condemn himself to be a monster, Eren replying that they've always been monsters. He doesn't suddenly get to act like he isn't, since even Armin has killed so many innocent people, like he did on the Bay of Liberio. And how Eren murdered those men when he was a child. Eren tells Armin that he doesn't want to fight his best friend. Armin feels Eren has betrayed their trust, since he promised he wouldn't take their freedom from them. Eren states that he didn't, and he still hasn't. It's still Armin's choice whether he decides to fight back against Eren. Armin, knowing he was weak, finally finds a resolve to do what is necessary. He is ready to stop his friend Eren, even if he has to kill him. And that's when you see this image of them conflicting. We see Kid Eren and Kid Armin. This is in reference to when Armin first looks into Eren's mindscape, seeing him as a child, but him also being displayed as a child. Now what's really interesting here is that it's all coming full circle, just as foreshadowed earlier, that both Mikasa and Armin would eventually move away and create distance between Danma and Eren, especially Armin and Eren. It literally being stated in the guidebooks that even the author can't see Armin and Eren being friends forever, and that they will eventually split up and move away from each other. And that concludes the chapter. Overall, I really enjoyed the chapter. I would probably rate it just as good as the first chapter they released, which is anywhere between 8 or 9. I don't think it's perfect, but I do think it's better than the original. It's getting a lot more hate than it probably should should be. I will be continuing this series. Also, if you want to see more Attack on Titan based content, just let me know down in the comment section. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, even consider subscribing. Check out my other videos, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.